let's dive in. So my name is Ari Salonen. I'm Midaxo CEO, based here in Boston, and I'm excited to welcome Rett to talk about cybersecurity. That is such an important element in M&A. So would you mind sharing a few words about your background and where you come from, Rett?
Sure, happy to, Ari. Thank you. So I'm Rett Summerville. I'm the Director of Cybersecurity and Compliance at Creo. Creo is a management consulting firm headquartered in Durham, North Carolina, but we do work around the world, focusing on life sciences and healthcare companies, helping the growth companies especially realize their full potential. And I've been working in the cybersecurity and compliance space for 20 plus years. Outside of work, I'm also a volunteer coach for track and field pole vaulting.
Excellent. So we have a ton of questions, and we have received from the audience pre-sent questions. I think I have 70 questions. I'm sure we won't have time to go through all of them, but let's get started. So not in interrogation type style, but perhaps more of a fireside chat.
Sure.
But let's start with that, like basics. So when we say cybersecurity in M&A, so what do we actually mean? Or what do you mean with it?
Yeah. Well, we know M&A is high risk, high reward business, and cybersecurity can really play an important role in either increasing or mitigating the risks. And that's important, obviously, because there could be risks that the acquiring company is inheriting from the target company. That could lead to security breaches. It could be data privacy fines, which could damage the reputation of the acquiring company. So it's an important topic, and when we talk about what cybersecurity, what that means exactly, fundamentally, it's about protecting information from the numerous threats that exist out there in the cyber world. Just from a foundation standpoint, we like to look at that protecting information from the perspective of confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the data. So some of you may have heard of that. We refer to that as a security triad. Most people think about confidentiality, that's obvious for security, but integrity and availability are also really important. We do a lot of work in life sciences and healthcare. Data integrity is absolutely crucial. When you're talking about patient records or data in clinical trials, availability is equally important. And in fact, we hear about the ransomware attacks, and those are really preying on availability because the attackers are taking information, encrypting it, and holding that decryption key as ransom.
But how is that specific to M&A process? One could say that, well, it's an important topic to run your business. What makes it specifically important in M&A, and when you are either selling your organization or buying, and why is cybersecurity important there?
Well, it's particularly important because if you're going to be acquiring a company, for example, you're most likely going to be integrating that company in with your own IT infrastructure. So if that target company if you're not aware of the security flaws that they might have or data privacy problems you may have, then you may be entering a situation where you're inheriting that, which could result in problems for you down the road. You could be facing fines or your own security problems because of that. So it's important, the way we like to look at it, and we help a lot of companies with conducting risk assessments during the M&A process, but the goal is really to reduce the surprises and give more confidence to the transaction. One of my M&A expert colleagues at Creo refers to it as, buying insurance for the deal. Really, so conducting that risk assessment is really important.
So what sort of, should we scare the audience a bit with scary war stories? But if you could say, what happens if you don't buy that insurance. And if you go without regards to cybersecurity into an M&A deal. So
Yeah.
do you have scary stories?
Yeah. There's some public stories, and then I've got some personal stories I can give. Some of the more well-known ones would be, when Marriott acquired Starwood. Starwood had what we refer to as an advanced persistent threat that had an attacker had planted some malware that had been in the environment for a couple years. They had no idea about it, and it was until after the acquisition by Marriott that this came to light, and there was a massive data breach that resulted in fines for Marriott, GDPR fines of $123 million. So pretty significant. Another big one was when Verizon acquired Yahoo, and there were a couple of data breaches that Yahoo had encountered but had not been disclosed, and they came to light during the negotiations, which resulted in Verizon lowering the purchase price by $350 million. So those are some of the public ones that are known, and there's a lot that happened. Of course, that there's no requirement to report these. You're not going to hear about them. But some other examples, just firsthand, that I run into would be examples like they could be more mundane. But for example, we really focus in on data assets and making sure we understand what the data assets are of the target company. And there was an M&A deal which closed, and we weren't involved in the diligence phase of this. We were more on the post integration. But it came to light that some of those high value data assets of the target company resided on the CEO's personal device, on their phone and their laptop. And the integration kind of got a little cantankerous. And when it came to the acquiring company saying, hey, we want that, we need that value, that data, and it was like customer contact information, we need that data. The CEO said, well, I'm not giving you my personal device, it's my personal device. So that's the type of thing that, a problem that can happen. There are other examples where we were working with a company that was entering the U.S., their foreign company were entering the U.S. market to do data analytics for healthcare environment. They wanted to acquire a technology company. And what they didn't realize is that the compliance requirements for operating that business. And so they made the acquisition and then realized later that they have to be HIPAA compliant, and they were not very familiar with that. There was also, to do business with healthcare companies, a lot of times you're expected to be high trust certified, which is a very tall order. So those are some examples of, the not doing the proper due diligence can lead to real serious problems.
So it really seems to center around due diligence and how you conduct the due diligence and how you surface these issues that the target might have in the process, so that you can negotiate the price better or even walk away from the deal, I guess. Right. So how would you recommend? Obviously, everyone tries to do that. So what are these sort of high-level maybe tips and tricks, or your approach how to surface these complicated issues in doing due diligence that is oftentimes hectic and time constrained?
Right. Yeah. Well, honestly, if possible, time allows, I recommend that you start thinking about it even in the strategy phase, because if you're looking to acquire a company, you need to be thinking about what geography you want to play in. If you are doing something in Europe, then there's going to be compliance requirements around GDPR. China has the new private data privacy standard. So understanding what's required to do business at a strategic level, I think that's ideal place to start thinking about security, compliance requirements. But as far as conducting, the risk assessment and due diligence phase, we like to really understand, what's the security posture of the target company. So what's the health of their security? do they have defined policies and procedures around security? So do they have a programmatic approach to how they handle security, or is security just something that maybe the IT team does, but it's not really documented, and there's not necessarily structure around the process. So those are some things that we look for when we're doing it. So I can go into more detail on some of those things. But
so it's actually like Midaxo gets audited by KPMG for ISO 27001 compliance. Right. It's almost like a root canal. So in fact, and which is welcome, and obviously improves our security situation. But so you would do a bit similar audit essentially on the target's security posture. Not only have there been issues, but also how are they prepared, what their processes and tools and so forth are.
Yeah, we like to take what we refer to as a top-down approach to our assessments. We like to start there, and that's really understanding what's important to the business. What are those critical systems? What are the high-value data assets? And then getting an understanding of how those data assets, where they reside, making sure they're not all on the CEO's laptop, and then how do those data assets move throughout the organization? How do they come into the organization? Are they shared externally? And then we can start to really assess, okay, how are they being protected? So that business lens of looking at cybersecurity and compliance, we feel is very important to start there. And then we do supplement that with more of a bottoms up, looking at every security control, all the typical, infrastructure type things that you'd want to see. But that top-down approach, we find that uncovers a lot of things that you might miss if you're just following the ISO 27001, doing a gap assessment against that. Although it's important, so you need to do both. I'll give you another example, and that is one of the things that we will come across, especially if it's the target company is a smaller organization. If they've developed some software, there may be one person that really understands that software developer. So we call that a key person risk. And we really try to understand that because we have seen situations where an acquisition happens, that key person decides they're not happy and they leave, and they end up turning into a very expensive consultant to keep the things going. So that's another example of the type of thing that we look at that maybe you wouldn't capture in an ISO audit.
Got it. So would you then also dive deeper into the actual technology, say it's a tech firm, software development methodologies and tools that they use, etc. And how would you go about assessing that? Do you use tools, or do you have specialists on your team to actually conduct that?
Yeah. So in some cases when we're doing diligence, we're being asked to look at the technology itself, and so we will do security architecture reviews make sure that there's not any blind spots. There was one client that we worked with that allowed hospitals to upload data that they would then analyze to make kind of business hospital management decisions. So it wasn't dealing with patient information necessarily, but when we did our architecture review, we realized that the hospitals, their customers could actually upload information that would contain patient information, and they wouldn't use it, but they would put it off to the side and store it. So they keep it because they want to get rid of it. And then they realize, okay, well, now you're just opened up yourself to be subject to a lot of requirements because you could have patient records in your environment. So that's the type of thing by doing that architecture review, we uncovered that and were able to advise them on how to handle that so they're more protected and keep that data out of their environment. So that's an architecture review. But what we could also, there's code reviews as well. We don't typically do that too much ourselves. There are tools that you can use that will do a security review on code. They're not perfect, but they can certainly help. And I would recommend supplementing that with a subject matter expert to look at if you need to look specifically at code.
So do you have I'm sure you have a playbook, I guess, for conducting a due diligence in different kinds of situations. You mentioned obviously close to your heart is life sciences and tech, but in other areas it may be a different type of playbook. So do you have like a ready-made playbook for different situations, and you say, okay, here's a life sciences case, and here's the domains that you need to probe, really diligently to because they have been the problem areas in the past in other cases. So how do you know what guides your process, if you will? I guess that's
Well, we do have a methodology. I think a playbook is a really good idea for folks. We have a methodology where we try to understand, what starting with the IT, what does the IT environment look like? What are the infrastructure components of the target? What are the systems, the services they rely on, even down to help desk, and then from there, determining, is this something that the acquiring company wants to purchase, or does that need to be addressed in a TSA? But so that would be an example of our approach. We like you said, we do focus on healthcare and life sciences, so we're more familiar with what to look for there, especially when it comes to PHI data or any sort of clinical research. There are a number of regulations that apply for that the FDA enforces when it comes to doing clinical studies. So we'll dive deeper into things like, how do they handle electronic records? Do they validate their systems? How do they maintain data integrity? So it's a different approach that we would take. I would say the common thing, though, Ari, is that we really try to understand that we follow the data, understand what the high value data assets are, and really follow that, and to make sure that is being protected and that's preserved throughout the acquisition.
So in your playbooks, do you, I guess it seems that you have like non-negotiable elements, meaning deal killers, if you want. You find something and you recommend your client, okay, let's not proceed. Is that the case, and you do have this sort of deal killer type findings that you have?
Yeah, so
share a few examples. I mean, that would be exciting. So make them come alive. So what sort of things have you found that killed the deal?
So let's see, that killed the deal. We don't typically advise on whether or not to go forward the deal, but we do try to understand what's the risk appetite for the acquiring company and keep that in mind. But some examples would be that if the target company handles high volumes of personal information or protected healthcare information, and that's not being managed properly, that could warrant killing the deal, because it's very difficult if that data is not managed, it could be spread throughout the organization, and you may think you got it cleaned up, which is a big effort, but there still could be remnants out there that just create a pretty big exposure for compliance problems down. So that would be an example.
Okay. So far, we have really focused on the due diligence and trying to probe the target for what their systems and processes are. But what about the process itself? And I'm thinking of in due diligence, sometimes external stakeholders are engaged, like lawyers, and we see, at least in the old world, a lot of confidential material being sent by email or other non-secure ways. And then, like in your hospital example, you don't know where they actually end up. So how do you advise in actually running the process, due diligence process, and I guess also the post-merger integration process in a way that is secure from an information security perspective?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, and I think it's really important that there's a structure, that they're following a structure, not just winging it with the communications. information that's shared that could impact the purchase price should not be sent over email. And the use of data rooms or other tools that help maintain that securely is really important. We don't like to use email for sending attachments, for example. We
Right.
Put the attachment in a place where it can be securely stored and provide access to that, which can later be turned off if needed. We try to avoid email as much as possible, but definitely the rule of thumb is just don't include anything in there that could affect the purchase price.
So how do you, when you work with the externals and who may actually get the emails or other attachments or other materials, and how do you advise your client in making sure that they don't then live a life of their own afterwards and get spread? So.
Well, that's where the use of a good data room can help.
Okay.
So rather than sending a file that's as an attachment that can be forwarded to whoever controlling that in a data room, that can, where there's going to be a watermark on who exactly downloaded this, and then the access can be turned off is a really good approach. There are some other technologies, data loss prevention technologies built into Microsoft and other providers that can perform that same function. But that requires, of course, all participants to be using that. So it's a little harder to set up for everybody. But the data room is probably the best approach, I'd say.
What about the post-merger integration phase, where two companies come together and may have to combine systems and processes and so forth? Any advice from a security perspective?
Yeah, well, I think that once the deal is announced. I think before it's announced, actually, that it's important that there's some security awareness training that's made provided to the staff, because as soon as this becomes public, you're basically putting a flag up for all attackers. Hey, come check us out. That's a point of vulnerability, because there's a lot of excitement. People are, they could be receiving emails about as simple as, hey, we're changing the logo of our signatures in our email. Click this link to get your the personalized signature that we've created for you. That's a great example that has been used as a phishing attack. So it starts even there, but then once you get into the integration, you need to find a secure way for sharing information. We use and collaborating. So we use Teams a lot, Microsoft Teams. That could be pretty effective. Setting up a Teams that both entities can access securely. I would say that's probably it's something you need to be mindful of, and using some sort of a collaboration tool where you can securely share information is really important, and moving it away from doing things by email, especially if they're not in the same tenant.
Yeah, I know a company who provides that sort of a set of tools. But let me very much appreciate the comment. What is interesting that we have heard from some integration cases is that when the integration actually has been announced and integration starts to take place, that is an opportune moment for attackers to send those phishing and other suspicious emails, if you will, because the other party doesn't necessarily know what to expect, and it's a new domain for them, particularly for the acquired company, whether it's customary for the acquiring company CEO to ask for Amazon gift cards, for example. It may not really be the case. So it's an opportune moment for the attacker, if you will, and should be prepared for as part of the integration plan. That's what we typically recommend. There is a couple questions actually here. So Tim asks about cybersecurity breach verbiage in M&A agreements. So how would you advise preparing for that before closing a deal or conducting a due diligence in the agreements. So.
Yeah, well, we're not lawyers, and I'm not, but so I have to always include that disclaimer. But I think that there definitely is language you could put around obviously disclosing of any known security breaches that have occurred in the past. I think or any compliance violations that are known. I think those are the types of things that you want to make sure that are fully disclosed in advance. I'm sure a lawyer would come up with some better way to state that and some other things to keep in mind as well.
Right. So related point, I guess, is not only cybersecurity but compliance, we have really focused on cybersecurity, but compliance goes hand in hand. So can you elaborate a bit on what you mean with compliance and in various parts of the M&A process, then I guess also contractual?
Yeah, well, compliance is really important. It's often kind of forgotten behind cybersecurity, but and it can range anywhere from just being important to absolutely vital to the deal, and that it depends on things like the geographies that you're dealing with, the industries that you're dealing with. So, for example, if your target company holds contracts with federal agencies, there's going to be requirements for compliance. For example, with FISMA, if it's related to cloud services, it could be FedRAMP. If the target's in the healthcare or life sciences space, let's just use life sciences. We already talked about healthcare, but if they're doing clinical studies, there are a whole slew of requirements that they need to be living up to. You need to look at, and that should be that could be, like I said, around data quality and making sure they have computerized system validation programs in place, and that sort of expectation needs to be clear upfront of what the targets actually, what their posture is when it comes to that.
Very good. So I think we are closely approaching our half-hour mark. But before we part ways, is what advice would you give for the seller? We have really focused on the buyer's perspective and what the buyer should look and so forth and do audits and so forth. What about the seller? You advise sellers as well in preparing for M&A. So how can a seller be best prepared to be a good candidate to be acquired?
All right. Well, that's important, obviously, too. So you want to make sure that you are ready, especially when it comes to security and compliance. You can't flip a switch and just become that. It has to be built into how you operate. Some of these compliance requirements may take years to build up to. So having a programmatic approach to how you handle security and compliance is really important. And being able to demonstrate that you're doing what your documentation says you're doing is super important. We come across this often where, we're provided information security policies or standard operating procedures that look good on documentation. And then we ask, demonstrate to me that you're actually following this. And they're not able to because they thought, well, if I've got the documentation, I've checked the box, I'm good to go. And so really being able to demonstrate that you're doing what you say is super important to prepare for an acquisition.
So it's not only for show, it's actually permeates the organization.
Right.
So if you had a couple bullets or advice to buyers out there who are running M&A, running due diligence, running integration, what advice would you say that you would give them today? Maybe 3 things that they should really be aware and consider from a cybersecurity and compliance perspective.
Mm-hmm. I think the number one thing is to take a risk-based approach to what you're doing. You only have so many resources and so much time to do your assessments. So really taking that risk approach really allows you to focus your energies where it matters most. I think secondly, making sure you understand what the high value data assets are of the target. That needs to be clear. And if you should be able to ask that question of the target, if you're not getting a straight answer, if they're not quite sure what their high value data assets are, that could be a red flag. And then thirdly, I'd say, understanding those, if there are key person risks that could impact the actual integration if they were to disappear. Ideally, you want to make sure that there's backup folks that have the knowledge that's needed. It's not limited to just one individual.
Excellent. So anything else? I think we went through maybe 1/3 of the questions that we were assigned. And thank you for the audience for submitting questions. Very much appreciated. I think we may leave it at this because I'm getting a sense that we might have a third edition of this discussion in the future. This field is obviously very fast evolving. New things emerge. So if you don't mind, Rett, I will invite you for next round, and we go deeper into some of these areas. And for the audience, I very much thank you for your attendance, your questions on this super important topic. And feel free to reach out to Rett and myself or our firms. Happy to respond to any questions you might have or help you in any way we can in your M&A endeavors. So with that, thank you so much for attending. Thank you, Rett, and we'll talk.
Thank you, Ari.